Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. A lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Peter Hammond is sick, and obviously our thoughts and prayers go to Peter. And we do have another guest who's joining me tonight, and that's, of course, Skidmarks. You know, our friend Colyn Serfontein. He's very knowledgeable about Ukraine and the war in Russia or the war in Ukraine, and other topics, and yeah, it's going to be our first live stream with Colyn, and I'm looking forward to it. But before I get Colyn on, let me just play for you a video clip regarding the situation in Ukraine, and this is from the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives, and it's Matt Gaetz who's talking about what America is doing in Ukraine. Here we go.
How much more for Ukraine? Is there any limit? Which billionth dollar really kicks in the door? Which red line we set will we not later cross? China reminds us that we have real issues. China began its offensive against our homeland, infiltrating our universities, stealing our innovations, buying off our politicians, surveilling our citizens, all the while capturing the loyalty of America's most powerful corporations. China's influence is overtaking ours, even in our own hemisphere. Our conflict with China may turn very hot very soon. Many believe we are currently in the window of a possible invasion of Taiwan. If not deterred, such an invasion would immediately make life worse for virtually every American. But tomorrow, President Biden will tell us how much more we must do for Ukraine. Look around your house. How much stuff is made in Ukraine, or even Russia, for that matter? Next to China, if you're watching this speech on a smartphone, you're likely using Taiwanese technology. So why Ukraine? A country that just rounded up dozens of senior leaders in its government over overt corruption. Perhaps the answer is as simple as the Hunter Biden life motto: the grifter's gotta grift. But the amount of money we now pour into Ukraine makes Burisma's wildest dreams of wealth through Biden family influence seem meek by comparison. Defense contractors need there to be a war going on somewhere, whether the arms end up in the hands of ISIS, the Taliban, the Azov Battalion, or on the black market. They get rich in the business of weapons supply, but only when there is weapons demand. A serious nation would never let foreign interests abroad or special interests here at home dictate its foreign policy. The interests of our countrymen must morally compel our greater attention. And as the war slogs on in Ukraine, the benefits to Americans are unclear. Bandits in the Sinaloa Mountains hurt more Americans than the men in Crimea. But foreigners come to Washington to lecture us about spending our constituents' money on a conflict thousands of miles away, and my colleagues are eager to oblige. On this floor, Zelensky's demands got bipartisan standing ovations from most. Stingers, HIMARS, tanks. At first, we said no to all of these things. President Biden even said that some of these things might lead to World War III. And then yet we sent all of them. F-16s are likely still. Lockheed Martin sure is confident that Ukraine will get F-16s. They told the Financial Times recently that they are already ramping up production. Create demand, provide the supply. This is escalating, and we are placing trust in leaders who do not deserve trust. John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman, who assured us that the Afghan military would withstand the Taliban offensive, now says that there is no risk that Putin will go nuclear. The risk of miscalculation in Ukraine is much, much higher than getting it wrong in Afghanistan. A nuclear war between Russia and the United States would end human life as we know it. And yet Biden is doing everything possible to provoke such a disaster. And for what? The actions we are taking are not going to end the war in Ukraine. In fact, we are probably prolonging the killing. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians will die this year because Congress feels good when it sends instruments of death and billions in cash. Many dollars sent for the war in Afghanistan ended up in bank accounts in Switzerland and Dubai. To where will we trace the bounty of Ukrainian grift? This war could end tomorrow if we pursued negotiation, but Biden refuses. Not only do we arm the Ukrainian military, we pay their politicians salaries. $113 billion in aid included funding the Ukrainian government. We can and must push for peace. You don't really hear that from many people these days, with the exception of President Trump. Trump is right to recognize that we are on the brink of World War III and that immediate action for peace is necessary to stop disaster. Unfortunately, there is a bipartisan coalition working to continue the war. When Elon Musk proposed a peace plan, Nikki Haley attacked him, saying we, quote, shouldn't push our weight on them. That is, of course, nonsense. We've pushed billions of dollars on them. We can simultaneously pressure North Korea and China from supplying Russia.
The gentleman's time has
I
expired.
ought to do so. Thank you. I yield back.
All right, so that's just a little bit of background to what's going on politically in the US when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Now, I'm going to get Colyn on so we can get this show on the road, and here we go. Hi, Colyn.
Yebo,
How are you, buddy?
I'm good, thank you, Scott.
I can't see you yet.
And
I've got your little icon. Can you get your cam on?
yeah, it's on.
I just see a little icon. Give it another go.
Oh, that's funny. Let me switch it on and
There you
off.
go. There you go. That's it. Now we got you. That's better. Okay, I'm just going to move myself off the screen here. Move you across there a bit. Okay, there we go. All set. Now, Colyn, thank you for joining me tonight. It's the first time we've actually had you on a live stream, and I look forward to many more in the future.
Yeah, well, if if I can bring value to your world, I'm happy to oblige.
Absolutely, you can. And look, we've got a large crowd of people from the Loving Life family. Do you want to just very, very, 2-minute background to yourself?
What do you want me to do?
Just give us a little bit of your history, what you've done in your life, and what you're doing now. Just a few little thoughts.
In a nutshell, I was born in 1952. And I was born on the eastern end of South Africa in Germiston.
Right.
Both my parents at that stage worked for Volkskas Bank. And then my father decided that there was no future for him in the bank, and he went worked as a farm manager in the Bothaville district. And that is where I only started getting some recollection of the life that is around me. And the things there are some things that I can remember from there. And then from there, he decided now he's going to give the mines a go, and he moved to the Witbank area he first worked as a storeman for about, I think, a year, and then he decided now he's going to go, he wants to be a miner. There's a better career path in mining for you.
Right.
And he started off as a learner miner, and at that stage, we lived in an old abandoned farmhouse on the mining property because there was not a house for us on the mine property. And all I can remember of those years is that we were extremely poor. My mother battled to put food on the table, and we lived out of the vegetable garden, and my one uncle would come once a week and shoot some pigeons and some finches and stuff like that. Wow. So I understand that life.
Yeah.
And then we got a house on the mining property, and things started changing. And I'm not going to make a long story. My dad went through the ranks, and he was the first Afrikaans mining manager in South Africa. And we moved a lot. He worked for shaft sinkers. That meant that he was traveling a lot. So I went to hostel, boarding school, when I was in standard 3. And on top of that, you must understand, I went to school when I was very young. I just turned 5. And so I was always the smallest and the youngest in the class. And then I landed in the hostel, and I mean, I was obviously subjected to a lot of bullying. Now, many guys, bullying have different effects on people.
Yeah.
In my case, it made me hell on wheels. I mean, I turned into a bloody terror, and like a fox terrier, ready to fight at the drop of a hat and willing to drop the hat myself. And that is how, and I went through up till matric. This is an incident that was, there was things in life that, there are certain things that happens to a man in your life, and it has a huge influence on you later on. In standard 8, when I was in standard 8, I was in Delmas in the hostel there, and we went to a circus. And on the way back from the circus, one of the notorious bullies in the hostel started his nonsense with me. And I said to him, when we get back to the hostel, I'll see you in the showers. And I laughed, the joke. And all right. Long story short, I ended up in that bathroom, and here was this guy, and then I must tell you, my head was about just under his chin. But he was, so used to bullying people. He didn't expect that. When I walked in, I looked at it and I knew there was no way out of this, and I just went for it. And I managed to get him down on the floor, and that was the end of him. And the teacher pulled me off the guy. But at that stage, yes, I was damaged. My nose was broken. My eye was... he gave me a hell of a beating. And the teacher started slapping me around. I thought, what the hell is this? And I got back to my room, and then I went down to the foyer, and I found my father. My father was the mine manager in Natal at that stage. In those years, it was a long way from Delmas. Vryheid was a long way from Delmas because it was not highways and super tar roads and things like that.
Yeah.
And I got hold of him, and I started talking, and I told him that this guy was slapping me around. The teacher was hitting me. And he said, what? And I said, yes, this is what happened. Now, me and my dad had a very special relationship. One of the things that I never in my life lied to my father. Never. That was one thing. If he corners me about something, he said, did you do that? I say, yes, and I get my hiding, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
And the days that I got a hiding for, that I feel unfairly, I always went from the point of view that those days where I got the hiding unfairly made up for the days that I was supposed to be blossomed and I didn't get it. And okay. So I'm happy with that. So, and while I'm talking to my father, the teacher walked into the foyer and he plucked me out of the phone booth and he started slapping me around again.
Oh, wow.
And he didn't realize that the phone was hanging and my dad could hear what was going on. In any case, 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. This happened on the Friday night. 3 o'clock that Saturday afternoon. Yep, he drives my dad in with his white Valiant. I nearly fell off my chair when I looked out of the window. The guys were calling me and saying, your dad is here. All right, and that's a long story. We go down to the Kosai's father, the guy that's in charge of the hostel, talking there. And I tell them what happened. And my dad said, bring that teacher here. I want to talk to that guy. And the teacher came in, and he was very cocky, this oak. And at a stage, he said something to my father. My dad said to him, are you talking to me like that? The guy said, yes. And my dad said to him, you know what? You have become spoiled. You are used to getting your way around little boys. And as he said, boys, floored that teacher. Man. And he said to me, go pack your bags. You're done. You're out of this school. Yes, and we packed and I pack up and all the shit and that goes. And takes me to Volksrust, which is closer to Vryheid and all of that. But this is at 8. Now I arrive in a new hostel, both eyes blue, and my nose is broken. Okay, obviously. Natural bait for the bullies. So that's how it goes. And I fought through my hostel lives. And then the last day in Matric, the last week in Matric, I got into a fight again. And the guy ended up in hospital and all of that. And after that, I said, okay, I made a pact with myself. I will never hit a guy in the face again. I must say, I've stuck to that quite closely. varsity days, I was a biker and all of that, so I was involved in a lot of those nasty things. I had a rough youth. I never talked to my children about this because my brothers always asked me, why didn't you talk to your kids about these things? And I said, I don't want to inspire them. And so I had a rough youth. And then on varsity, and then my dad died of a heart attack. Yes, that was a terrible blow to me. I was 21. I was just turning on 22 when he died. And that was more of a shock for me. And I think that also contributed to me turning from being an extreme extrovert to an introvert. And today, okay. Then from there I finished my varsity thing, and on varsity I had a few good professors, but there was one that has become a mentor to me because I was doing a subject that was outside of the law degree subjects. So I had to take it part-time at the after hours facilities of the varsity. So on a Saturday morning, one of the classes was on a Saturday morning. Now, yes, how's it for a student to be in class on Saturday morning? Now, many times I arrived there and I'm the only guy. So me and this guy chatted a lot, and he taught me to think without boundaries. And that was the most important lesson I learned from him. The fact that mentally you can explore the universe, but you must be willing to take that risk, to go there. Let your mind go. Imagine these things. Imagine these things. Try and find the limits. And that is the thing. And today, I've been in a meeting about 5 years ago. I had to go to a board meeting in Joburg, and my son went with me. And when we had the lunch break, the one guy came to me and said, listen, I believe you live like a hermit there in the bush. But look at what you did here in this boardroom today. And I said to him, you must understand something. I'm a hermit by choice with excellent social skills. And this is, and I ask the audience to forgive me when I say this, but that is who I am. At another occasion, my son was with me in a board meeting again, and things got heated up in the board meeting, and I leaned forward on the table and I looked the guy straight in the eyes and I said to him, fuck off. And he went quiet. You could hear a pin drop in that boardroom. And I sat back and I waited for him, and I thought, now you must be careful what your next word's going to be, because I'm not going to talk anymore. In any case, when we got in the car and we drive back to Nelspruit, my son said to me, you know, Dad, you're the only guy that I know that can tell someone to fuck off in a boardroom meeting. And I said, well, you must also understand, you must not try that. Because I've got the personality that can carry that. And it is rare that if I use that word, that someone will try and reprimand me. But that's how I am. That's the guy that I am. And, you know, okay, and then I went through a period where I was forced into a BEE operation, which, I mean, those BE partners, they referred to me as the AWB boer from Nelspruit, and that they couldn't handle me. And in the end, I left that company. I was gone there, I think, 3 months, and it went belly up. And that company was built on my technology. But that's how life is. And today, when I started off with this Skidmarks brickmarker thing, originally it was a written blog that I had, where I just talked about the things in life, the way I see things. And it's quite popular, and in any case, the fact of the matter is, when I started doing the video thing, in the beginning it was a little bit awkward for me, but I realized the problem that most of the people that I know and get in contact with, the biggest problem is they are either very busy and don't have the time to really explore sources and things. So they believe everything that the radio or the TV tells them.
Yeah.
And it's gospel to them, and that's the end of it.
The fake news.
And when I started doing my research for my videos, it was a system shock to me to realize that basically my life was a lie.
Yeah.
And that was a hell of a thing for me to make peace with that. And I did a skid mark on that specific topic a few days or a week or 2 weeks ago. And the fact that me and you talked about the moon landing last night, and we laughed a lot about it. Until as recent as a year ago, I still believe that was the thing. That was it.
Now, mate, and look, let's get on to the subject tonight, which is we'll start off with Ukraine. Because, as you said, you've done a lot of research, and you've now got a whole new perspective on life and what's going on in the world today. Now, one of the first things that when we talk about the war in Ukraine that we need to understand is that people talk about it being the first anniversary of the war on the 24th of February this year. And that's a load of BS, isn't it? Do you want to give us a bit of the history behind the war in Ukraine?
Look, the brutal reality of that war actually started a long time ago. But 2014 was a watershed moment, because it was in 2014 that the Americans orchestrated that coup there, that ousted the president that the people have elected, and they installed this clown they've got now. Now, just prior to the coup, the situation was that Ukraine wanted a loan. They needed capital. I think it was $15 billion or something like that. And they got an offer from the IMF, and that offer included a few conditions. And one of the conditions was the EU thing, and there was a few other, I can't remember off the top of my head. So the IMF loan was conditional that Ukraine will become basically part of the West. And then Russia put an offer on the table. 15 billion, match the money, no condition. and that President Poroshenko chose to take the Russian one. And that was the spark that turned that hellhounds loose into Ukraine. And they manipulated everything, and they did that color revolution and overthrew the government, and there was a lot of things that happened. Ugly, nasty things.
And just on that, Colyn, back in 2014,
yes?
The CIA were very involved in that, the Central Intelligence Agency, in overthrowing the Ukrainian government.
Yeah.
And
yes.
also the Open Society Foundation, George Soros, they've been very active in Ukraine.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were the engineers of that whole thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, today, look, I mean, there was that famous talk of Victoria Nuland where she said, fuck the EU. Poroshenko. And I mean, they think they had a right to do it.
Yeah.
That's what they think. The Americans are of the opinion they had a right to do what they did there.
And I guess
it was this new regime.
I guess what's really important there, Colyn, is that the further east you go in Ukraine, the more Russians you find. And in fact, in the eastern provinces of Ukraine, it's basically part of Russia. And this whole war is because the Russians want to be part of Russia and not part of Ukraine. And that's been going since 2014. It's not something that's been going for a year.
No. And you know what was the big thing is this, and very few people realize this back-end stories that's going on there. There was those referendums was done in Donetsk and Lugansk, and the people voted to be independent of Ukraine.
Like Crimea.
No. Yeah, Crimea was part of Russia.
Yeah.
Independent. And Putin didn't want that. He never acknowledged that. The Minsk agreements clearly also stipulates self-governance for Donetsk and Lugansk, but inside Ukraine, part of Ukraine. And that self-governance is very similar to what we've got in South Africa, the problem that we have in South Africa. That is what many people want. They don't want to be an independent country. They just want to be in charge of their own lives in their own area, and that's it.
Yeah.
But okay, so that's what happened there. And Putin was, and then in the meantime, and now this came out in the past 2 months, Merkel, she acknowledged and said that the Minsk agreements were only done to bluff Russia, to give Ukraine time to build up its army and build up its military and all of those things. And Putin was apparently disgusted when that story from Merkel came out, because then he realized that they have bluffed him, they have fooled him.
Yeah.
And in that, I personally believe the West has destroyed the last hope that they ever had to get a negotiated settlement in Ukraine with Russia. There's not going to be negotiations. Russia is going to put the terms on the table, and they will sign or they don't sign. That's it.
You know
That's what I believe.
You know what I find really, really disturbing is that it's like the West are throwing all their tanks into Ukraine, their missiles they're sending to Ukraine, bullets, guns, the whole 9 yards, and it's almost like it's almost like a world war when you consider the armaments that Ukraine now have, which are basically from the West. Without those armaments, Russia would have taken Ukraine a long time ago. So
what was the two objectives that Putin clearly stated when the operation started? What was the two objectives?
Well, I know that one was to free up the eastern states where the people, the Russian people, were being oppressed.
That wasn't the objective.
Okay, tell us, what is the objective?
The objective was to demilitarize Ukraine.
Yeah.
And to denazify Ukraine.
Right. Now, that second one is something that a lot of people aren't really aware of. Do you want to tell us about the Azov regime in Ukraine?
Look, prior to 2014, they were operational in the west of Ukraine. Lvov is their, you can say, head office. Mm-hmm. They were there, and the Russians were very aware of them, but the West was also aware of it. Because if you go and look at American legislation and stuff, prior to the war, they have got legislation that forbid any American money to reach Azov hands. And it was Zelensky that brought them into government and into the military and all of that. And he brought them to prominence. The area, Mariupol, was the original.
There's that big steel mill there.
Excuse me?
There's that big steel mill there at Mariupol.
Yeah, Azovstal.
Yeah.
Now, Mariupol was basically the headquarters of the Azov Brigade. And then they've got a spin-off that is in Kherson. Mm-hmm. You know, a subsection that is in Kherson area. And that is why that fight in Mariupol was so bloody. Because the Russians was determined to exterminate Azov. They were not interested in getting them to surrender. They were there to exterminate them. I listened to a discussion one night, and the one guy, he's a Russian, and he said that there is a section in the Kremlin that are of the opinion that a large percentage of the Azov guys, those new Nazis, are beyond reproach. They will never change. They will never change their views, nothing. So the Russians has got no option but to exterminate them. And, all right. Now, we can talk a lot about that, but that's not, the big thing is that Nazi element is what makes me uncomfortable with the West's involvement in the Ukraine. In 1940, the Second World War was fought. That was the thing. The Nazis wanted to devour everything. And it was the Russians that stopped them in the end. Without the Russians, they would have won. And it was the Russians that stopped them. But it cost the Russians 27 million people.
Wow.
That is a lot of people. And then we see, now we're going to drift a little bit off here, but what we see now in the West, the West is supporting Nazis.
Yeah.
They are financing them. They are arming them.
Well, I'll tell you how crazy it is, Colyn. I'll tell you how crazy it is. Facebook allowed Azov to have a Facebook page, even though they're Nazis. They had Nazi symbols on there. They had the whole 9 yards. And yet, if you said something against COVID, they would take you down. I mean,
Yes.
the whole idea with social media is so distorted. And look, we're getting off the subject from Ukraine, but
No. But
you know,
it's good that we discuss these things.
yeah,
Scott, there's so many people, even people listening tonight, that are not aware of these things.
yeah. And of course, when you look at the political involvement of the top U.S. politicians like Biden, Kerry, Nancy Pelosi, all their sons, interesting, those three top American politicians, their sons have huge financial interests in Ukraine, where they're tied up
That
with the...
is the reality.
Yeah, it's the corruption there is extraordinary.
Ukraine was labeled the most corrupt country in the world prior to the Russian taking them.
Yeah.
That place is horrifically corrupt.
Yeah.
The people do not understand.
Human trafficking.
Look at this,
the human trafficking there is extraordinary.
I can tell you about that. I listened to a speech of Putin prior to the invasion. And my wife was sitting here. She was watching this interview. And the reporter asked Putin, why is he now so focused on Donbass? And he said, one of the things in the Donbass that is very upsetting for him is the large number of women that are being abducted for the prostitution operations in the world. He said, but there's another thing. They are abducting a hell of a lot of children there for this adrenochrome and organ donations and pedophiles and whatever. And when he started talking about the kids, now Putin is usually a very composed speaker.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I saw that man go emotional. Now, I have not mentioned it, but I have got also a dark history, and I was well trained in interpreting body language by the old regime. And then I looked at him and I looked at his face and I said to my wife, and my exact words were to her, Poppy, hierdie ou gaan die Oekraïne opfok. And I mean, if you think back to what happened in February, early March last year, the Russian paratroopers occupied Chernobyl and that one airport close to Kiev where that big freighter, Remria, where that freight plane was based. And they also captured 3 or 4 biolabs there in that area around Chernobyl. Now, apparently, it is extremely wild country, that. And when they were returning from the biolabs, they stumbled onto camps where there was a lot of children in captivity. And the children told them that their keepers fled when they heard the Russians was coming. And the kids were without food and whatever. In the end, the number of children that the Russian forces recovered was 38,000.
Wow.
Think about that, Scott.
That's incredible.
In Mariupol, once they had the Nazis out there and they had the city under their control, they started working, building by building, working through that city. And the International Red Cross building, in the basement, they found fridges with child and bags and bags and bags of adrenochrome.
Oh, no.
Now, that's in the Red Cross building, Scott. What does that tell you?
Yeah, not good.
How corrupt is that nest? It's a viper's pit. Now, you know how they get the adrenochrome.
Oh, yeah, they torture the kids so that their
They
adrenaline...
torture the kids
Yeah.
and then they drain it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Can you
shocking.
imagine that?
Yeah.
And apparently that whole Hollywood is on that shit.
Mm.
The Pelosi and all of them are using that.
Yeah, just for people who don't know what adrenochrome is, it's basically a product which is used by very, very wealthy elderly people, which is supposed to reduce their or make them younger. It's supposed to sort of stop them aging, and it's very, very expensive because the actual process of getting adrenochrome is shocking and disgusting, and really we don't want to go into that here. But the stuff that's going on in Ukraine is absolutely awful. It's crazy. Now let's get back to the let's get back to the war that's happening.
Just give me a moment. I just want to talk about something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, the Russians captured a lot of the biolabs, and they have already published papers. And they've released papers to the UN and all. And one of the documents that they have spoken about, they claim that the COVID was made in a lab in Ukraine. And it was transported from there to Wuhan.
Wow.
And now, can you remember, in the beginning of the pestilence, the Americans denied that it was a lab leak.
Yeah.
The Americans denied that it was a lab leak. Because Fauci is involved in that one lab.
Well, look,
and they denied that it was a lab leak. And now, what has happened in the past 2 days?
Well, they're confirming now. The guy who heads up
now they say
FBI,
it was a lab leak.
Yeah, the FBI guy.
And they're blaming the Chinese.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now look, now let's look at the war in Ukraine right now, and it's at a very, very interesting stage, because what happened, just by way of history, the Russians basically walked into Ukraine and they got right up close to Kiev. But then I think they made a fatal mistake when they had huge convoys of tanks on these narrow roads, which were like sitting ducks, because, you know, they could be targeted. And they did a sort of a retreat, and they retreated to those eastern states and the southern states of Ukraine. But in recent weeks, they've actually now started going back into Ukraine. And there's one particular area where there's a huge amount of fighting going on. It's a very strategic area, and it's called Bakhmut. And what I want to do, Colyn, is I want to share a screen with you. I'm going to share this with everybody who's watching, because this basically explains how incredibly destructive and how look, just read that headline. Most Ukrainian soldiers on Bakhmut front are killed within 4 hours.
Yes.
And here they're saying that a retired American Marine fighting in Ukraine said the front lines are a meat grinder where soldiers survive an average of 4 hours. What do you have to say about that? I mean, it's like just sending cattle into a pen to be slaughtered.
Let me recap for you. you mentioned the lines of tanks on the narrow roads near.
Yeah.
You know that Putin instructed the army not to damage the agricultural land, so they must stay on the roads,
Right.
not damage civilian infrastructure, not kill civilians. Now, there's really a lot of commentators that have spoken about it and said that the Russians are fighting with their one hand tied behind their back. Okay, but that's not. Now, let me just first handle the Kiev thing for you. The reason they went to Kiev is they had information that the elites in Kiev was ready to revolt against Zelensky. That is the intelligence that the Russians had. So they thought by threatening Kiev, it will trigger that revolt. And the people in Kiev would basically give them the keys to the gates. And if you remember correctly, a lot of Russians were killed in that surrounding area between Kiev and the Belarusian border.
Yeah, Chernobyl.
Because intelligence told Putin that the people will welcome the Russian soldiers. And the Russians went in, and in many of the towns, I mean, there was also stories about how many officers, high-ranking officers, the Russians lost. You remember that?
Yeah.
And that happened because those Russian officers, they went into the towns to discuss that story with the mayors. And they were ambushed and killed. Mm. And then there was that, I'm going to call it Tucha, but you know what I'm meaning. That fiasco where the Western press made a hell of a story of all the atrocities the Russians have done there, but which has now been, they've been shown out to be bullshit. And the Russians left and they pulled back when they realized there's not going to be an uprising in Kiev. And those forces that were at Kiev were pulled back into the Donbass. Now, okay. After that fiasco at Kiev, Putin fired 70 intelligence officers.
Wow.
70 were fired. And then they focused on the Donbass and Mariupol. Now, in Mariupol, it was for them important to insert. Now, while they were sitting there at Kiev, the Ukrainian forces from Odessa and Mariupol to come and help protect Kiev. So it was, it was a bluff. And then when the Russians left Kiev, the rest of their forces were already beginning to encircle and cut Mariupol off, because that was the important thing for them, to get Mariupol, but they wanted to catch as many Nazis there as they could. Mm. And they did that. So we must not look at that thing that happened at Kiev and say, yeah, but the Russians got whipped there and so on. Well, they withdrew because they had incorrect information.
Right. Now, what
I look at Bakhmut now, what is happening in Bakhmut, there's a lot of commentators, the pro-Western commentators, make a big story of how the Russians are struggling at Bakhmut. But the Bakhmut area, for start, is a very, that is very complicated. No, yeah, there it is. Look at that. You can see it's basically encircled now.
Yeah.
But what the Russians are doing, have been doing for the past, I mean, they started with Bakhmut in October last year. And that General Surovikin, he rearranged the front line and reorganized the front line. It was also him that withdrew the Russian forces from Kherson and so on. And there was a lot of Westerners that made a hell of a story about it. But it was a damn good tactic because they were too thin. I mean, you can imagine 150,000 men on a 1,400 kilometer front line. How many men is that per kilometer? It's almost nothing. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, they started with that recruitment drive. The Wagner guys are the guys that are fighting, that's doing the fighting there. And the reason why they are doing the fighting there is they are specialists in urban warfare. The Russians just support them on the back. Now, I listened one night to a discussion, and there was a ex-Russian fleet officer involved in the discussion. And he said the West does not, he cannot understand that the West is missing the point of Bakhmut. The Russians is in no hurry to take Bakhmut because the Ukrainians has invested so much in the PR around Bakhmut. Because Bakhmut is actually not really that an important strategic point. But the Ukrainians has made it into that for the simple reason it is a thing that could be well defended, and it was turned into a fortress over 8 years. And then they've got that salt mines under those cities, Bakhmut and Solidar. There's 180 kilometers of tunnels there.
Yeah.
And it is huge tunnels. I mean, they had pop concerts in some of those tunnels.
Incredible.
And soccer games and whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, that's where the Ukrainians, they keep their ammunition and they keep their hardware and stuff there, and then they come out at night and terrorize the environment, and then they flee back in there.
Yeah.
And the Russians don't want to use those bunker buster bombs there because they don't want to destroy the mines.
Yeah.
Because those mines are very valuable. I mean, that is the biggest source of salt in the world.
Yeah.
And okay, but what they then did at Bakhmut, and now you can hear that there's many commentators talk about the Bakhmut meat grinder. One of these clips that you showed mentions the word meat grinder. It's an ugly word to use because it's humans we're talking about.
Yeah.
But the Russians are sitting around that place, and the Ukrainians are throwing soldiers in like hell. There are commentators that say the Ukrainians lose 1,000 men a day there. Think about that.
That's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
1,000 men a day.
Yeah.
I listened to a discussion, and there was a soldier, a Wagner soldier was talking, and he said it is absolutely soul numbing for them to kill so many people in a day.
Yeah. It's like target practice. Now,
Yes.
just on that point, just so people understand, when we talk about the Wagner battalion, it's actually a contracted group of soldiers. It's not actually the Russian army. It's one of those oligarchs who's what he's done is he's gone to some of the gulags or prisons in Russia, and they've used some of those prisoners to go and fight in the war in Ukraine. And I think it's after 3 months, if they're still alive, they then get a pardon from their prison
6
sentence.
months.
6 months, yeah. Yeah, but
Yes.
that's
But
where the
now
Wagner
also-
people come in. But yeah, back to you.
Just before we make too much of a story about the fact that they are using prisoners,
Yeah.
the French Foreign Legion
Oh, yeah.
also does it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So to me, the fact that they are using prisoners is immaterial. I mean, now a guy is sitting in jail for drugs or for something.
Yeah.
So instead of sitting 5 years, you can go fight for 6 months. They don't bring, really heavy criminals out
Yeah.
to Wagner. It's guys that we can call petty thieves, blue collar crimes and things like that. But in any case, Wagner plays a very important role there because they are specialized in urban fighting.
Yeah.
And the thing is this, that forces. Ukraine is being depopulated. I mean, there's many videos of how the Ukrainians are catching young guys on the streets and so on. And I saw a video 2 days ago of an American, she's with one of American humanitarian things or something, and she was in a hospital near Bakhmut. And it was absolutely horrific to see those wounded soldiers there. The bulk of them are old men. If I say old men, guys in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Well, the thing that really strikes me, Colyn, is that you've got the West pouring. They're now talking about putting in jets and these military planes and stuff like that. But there's going to be no one to fly them. There's going to be no one to drive the tank because they're running out of people. They're all being killed. What's going to happen then? The only option is they've got to bring in their military, and if they do that, that's World War III.
But the estimates are that there are in the Bakhmut area 30,000 foreign soldiers fighting for the Ukraine.
Wow. Well, then
10,000 Poles.
But then we are in World War III.
It is. They don't want to name it. And I said to a friend of mine the other night, and he was all over me about my pro-Russian shit. And I said to him, you realize 41 countries are supporting the Ukraine effort. 41.
Including Australia. I mean, I don't know what the heck Australia are doing sending them stuff.
I don't know.
Now,
I can't understand that.
Now, despite that, Colyn, who's winning the war in Ukraine? I mean, are the Russians winning? Is NATO winning? Because NATO is basically fighting on the side of Ukraine. Who do you think is winning?
The Russians are winning. I mean, they've already taken about 25% of the Ukrainian land. And the Russians, the most reliable sources sees the kill ratio in Ukraine as 1 Russian for every 6 Ukrainians, and there are commentators that say it's 1 Russian for every 10 to 12 Ukrainians. So the Russians are taking losses. There's no two ways about that. But this decision of the Germans to supply that German tanks,
the Leopard tank,
did something in Russia that the West don't understand. And the simple idea of German tanks on Russian soil has united the Russian nation.
Yes, 75% are behind Putin now. Yeah.
Yeah. I listened to a guy the other night, and he made a very interesting statement, Scott. And he said, the West sees Putin as the president of Russia and the main political figure. He says, but the West does not understand the Russian people. To the Russians, president, Putin is their leader. Yes, I'm getting goosebumps when I say these things. You understand the difference between being the president and being the leader.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference.
Mm.
How many leaders are there in the West? Tell me.
Well, you got people like Justin Trudeau and Jacinda Ardern, not many. You got bloody Macron. I mean, I don't know where they find these goons. I mean, and they become political leaders. All they are just spokespersons for the World Economic Forum. That's all they are.
Exactly. I don't know if you looked at my skidmark I did on Americans. What have you done?
Yes. Yeah, I actually put it up on Loving Live TV. Yeah.
Okay. I published one this morning. Europeans, what have you done?
Mm.
And the fact of the matter is, the Russians are winning. I've got a guy that stalks me. I call him my Nazi stalker. And he made the statement that the Russians are being whipped. And I said to him, I want you to answer these questions for me. How many pieces of armament did Ukraine start off with? And he bumbled, and I gave him the numbers. Europe, prior to this war, there was only one country in Europe that could actually fight against Ukraine, and that was Turkey. None of the European nations would stand against Ukraine. Do you realize that?
Well,
Scott?
Yeah, I just say to you that when you think historically, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and I think something that really, to me, is such a huge catalyst for this war is the fact that when the Soviet Union broke up, they had the agreement that said that they would not have any countries east of Germany joining NATO. So you'd have a buffer between Russia and the West. And what's the first thing they did? They started bringing NATO into all these countries east of Germany. And if Russia went into, let's say, Mexico and started putting missiles up in Mexico, do you think the US would stand by and watch? I don't think so.
You don't even have to say if. Look what happened in Cuba.
Yeah. Cuban Missile Crisis,
We
1970.
almost had a nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so, Ukraine military, and I said to him, okay, this was the biggest army, best equipped army in Europe. Why is it necessary for the West to give them now so much weapons? And he couldn't, and he didn't respond. And I said to him, because the Russians have destroyed that whole military.
Yeah.
Now you're rearming them. And the Russians are going to do it again.
Yeah. Well,
and you want to tell me the Russians are losing?
What has come out of this too, Colyn, is that the military itself is so corrupt that a lot of the armaments that America's sent to Ukraine have actually been sold on to other people. including the
Yes,
Russians.
the black market.
That,
I saw a video of a container that the Turks opened in Istanbul because the Turks was policing that grain deal.
yeah,
They opened the thing and there was a chopper inside of it.
incredible.
They are so corrupt, you cannot believe it. But the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is, the Russians has destroyed that original Ukrainian army. They basically destroyed all that men. These Ukrainians are grabbing people off the street.
Sorry, guys.
The meat grinder in Bakhmut.
Yeah.
And the Russians are just sitting there, patiently waiting for the Ukraine to feed them. Why must they take Bakhmut?
Now,
If it is such a convenient place to sit actually almost in the armchairs and
yeah. Now, I just want to steer back to what to me is one of the most significant things that's happened during this last year. And that is in about August, September last year, Putin had that meeting with the 4 governors of the 4 provinces in Ukraine that Russia is now claiming as part of Russia. And and they all sort of accepted their post as governor. And Putin said, at that moment in time, he said that those states, which include the Donbass, Kherson, Luhansk, I've forgotten the other one's got a long name, but there are 4 of them, which are on the south. Yeah, and basically Putin said that they are now part of Russia, and if anyone tries to dislodge Russia from there, it's a nuclear war.
But you know, Scott, and this is something that the Western press don't tell the people. They talk that they want those regions back that Russia has taken. Russia cannot give those regions back because it's against their constitution.
Yeah. Well, they're part of Russia now because they had that referendum and they all said we want to be part of Russia.
Yeah. And you know, another little, just a little bit of a trivia here. In October last year, in October 2021, 2021, those governors from Luhansk and Donetsk went to the Kremlin and begged Putin to take them. And he said he cannot because Putin is a guy that operates, according to the law.
Yeah.
And he said, I cannot do it. I cannot even come and help you because there's no provision in the UN Charter for me to come and help you. You are part of Ukraine. And that is when they did that referendum themselves, declared independence. And I think it was North Korea and a few other countries that immediately recognized them. Mm. And the moment that they were recognized, you know that UN Charter is actually stupid. One country must recognize you and you're done.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're a country. In any case, that opened the door for Putin to call on that article, I think it's Article 37 or something, where he can help a neighbor that is in trouble. Mm. I'm paraphrasing. And, okay, so they declared independence, they were recognized, and then they made an official request to the Duma for help. And the Duma approved it. And that gave Putin the authority to send the troops in. Now, there was a plan in Ukraine to hit the Donbass in March 2022 and move very fast to the eastern border at Rostov-on-Don And they knew that if they did that, Russia will attack them. And the Americans told the Ukrainians, if that happens, then we can scream, help, help, Ukraine are being attacked. And then we can come in and help you.
But you know,
And
Colyn,
Putin preempted that.
I've got to say the hypocrisy of America is absolutely astounding, because you look at what they've done to Syria. I mean, they've destroyed Syria, and they've basically now occupied the part of Syria where the oil is mined or extracted. You've got companies like Exxon operating in this little
They
part.
steal 80% of oil production every day.
Yeah, in Syria.
Do you know the ridiculousness? Iran is supplying Syria with oil for their power stations and to heat the people's homes. And Iran is supplying them with fuel for their cars and for their trucks and things.
Yeah.
It is absolutely, look, my Skidmarks reflects it. I've got zero respect for the West anymore. Zero. Then they need to say that Van der Crazy said they got to put up what do we call that? Some court system to try the Russians for war crimes.
War crime tribunal.
A war crime tribunal.
Yeah.
Who the hell are they to say that? What are they doing? I mean, I was absolutely shocked into the marrow of my bones when I learned that the Americans does all the targeting on the HIMARS systems. They do the targeting.
Yeah, they
that
actually run them.
Ukrainian sitting in that system just push the button for launch.
Yeah.
So, by definition, it is the Americans that are shooting the civilians in the Donbass, in Donetsk. Because those people are being shot with HIMARS.
Yeah.
I mean, Scott, this is absolutely, you know, I have seen now lots and lots of videos of the things that happened to those people in the Donbass, to those Russians living in the Donbass. I mean, Eva Bartlett had an interview with, I mean, this girl is 6 years old. She basically grew up in a basement. And that bloody Ukrainian president, as was said right after 2014, and was said, the Russians, the Ukrainian children will go to school and the Russian children will hide in basements. But the West financing. In my Skidmark that I did on the Americans, I showed that, you know, where that a guy was carrying his daughter out of that bombed out building in Yemen. And I asked, you're sitting here in your house there in Beverly Hills or in New York or wherever, far away. But imagine it was your child that you had to carry out of this building in which you are sitting now.
Yeah.
How would you feel about the people bombing you? And who is bombing those Yemenis? The Americans and the French and the British. I mean, a ridiculous thing. The British fleet is blockading the Yemen harbors. That same useless fleet can't keep rubber ducks off the UK beaches.
All the illegals come in, yeah.
How is that?
No,
okay, that is a whole program.
Mate, look,
I'm
going to wrap up our live stream in about the next 10 minutes, but there is something I'd like to get your perspective on when we talk about the war in Ukraine. Let's say Russia wins the war. Let's say Russia takes over Ukraine. What then? What happens then?
What is that going to look like?
Well, what will happen? I mean, let's take a hypothetical where Russia take over
Look,
Ukraine. What will
I am
happen
of the
then?
opinion. I am of the opinion. Cannot politically afford to not take Odessa. He cannot afford that. That will be political suicide if he does not take Odessa. Now, if he takes Odessa, they've got a land bridge to Transnistria. Now, Transnistria is in the press lately, the past 3-4 days, because the Ukrainians are itching to get their hands on those warehouses full of old Soviet weapons, ammunition that is in Transnistria. But apparently there's 20,000 tons of Soviet ammunition still there. There used to be 400,000 tons, but it has been taken out over the years. And they guesstimate there's 20,000 tons of ammunition there that Ukraine desperately needs. And so they will have to take Odessa and connect it to Transnistria. And once that is done, you must also understand, then the real Russian part of Ukraine is back part of Russia. The central part of Ukraine and the western part of Ukraine is not Russians. There are a few, but not the majority there is not Russians.
Yeah.
And I believe that once Bakhmut falls, it's going to be quick to drive the remnants of the Ukraine army. I don't even think they'll need to drive them. They're going to run out of the Donbass. Then the Donbass is clear and they get into central Ukraine. And that is where I believe that the gloves is going to come off. And they're going to shoot the hell out of those people there, because then it's not Russians. The problem that they have in the Donbass is the civilians that are there are Russians.
Yeah.
And soldiers don't want to kill Russians. So they're going to sweep out and clean out the Donbass, which is close. Then they'll go back and they will again go across the river to take Kherson and clean the Kherson province out. And at the same time, I personally believe there's going to be a marine attack on Odessa. They're going to take Odessa from the sea. And once that is done, you must understand, then there's very little of Ukraine left, because as it is now, the areas that the Russians has already taken is the bulk of Ukrainian agricultural land, and the bulk of their industrial installations, the bulk of their gas fields, the bulk of their oil fields, the bulk of their coal fields, the bulk of Ukraine's economy is under Russian control now. And I just laughed the other night. I saw an article where the guys were talking and they were telling how much land did Zelensky sell to BlackRock. And I said to my wife, I want to see that lands claim court sitting in Moscow with BlackRock telling the Russians that land is actually theirs.
Good luck with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good luck with that one. Yes. So I think up to there, that is what I see.
Yeah.
The western part of Ukraine is really a problem, Scott. Mm. Because the Russians don't want the western part, because that is the Nazi nest, and it's not Russians staying there.
Well,
and I personally believe that if the Poles were not so belligerent and stupid, and they had backdoor communications with Russia, Putin would have told them long ago, take that western part, just stay out of our area.
Well, there is a natural there is a natural geographic like a dividing line, which is I think it's called the Donetsk
The
River.
Dnieper River.
There,
Yes.
that river there that comes through the middle of Ukraine, and basically comes around here and then goes through there. That could be the dividing line between the new Russia.
That is. I think that's a general feeling, Scott.
Yeah.
That is the general feeling. The only thing is, there at the top, you must see where Kherson City is.
Right.
The Russians have to take Kherson.
Yeah.
And it looks to me like they're busy softening Kherson up. And the problem is now, if you move the chart up, go look at the bottom.
There's Kherson there.
It goes into the Azov Sea.
Yeah.
Kherson is on the other side of that river. Kherson City.
Yes. Yeah.
They have to take that. And then Odessa is a little bit more to my left.
Yeah. There's Odessa there.
Yeah.
And then Crimea,
They'll
of
have
course,
to take
is
Odessa.
the Crimea is that part there.
Yeah.
Now, I hear that Zelensky...
Crimea is Russia. There's no way in the world anybody is going to take Crimea from Russia.
Yeah. Well,
There's no way.
I heard that Zelensky is saying that he's going to take Crimea back. That was his latest comment.
Take Crimea back, you say?
That's what Zelensky said.
He can't take his bloody toilet back, that guy. The fact of the matter is, if you look, just think about this for a moment, Scott. How long has the West now been in scrambling around and scrounging around to get 70 tanks to Ukraine?
Mm.
How long is it?
Long time.
6 weeks? 2 months?
And then they've got to train them how to use them.
Yeah, no, we still train them to use them, but the physically acquire the tanks.
Yeah.
To physically acquire the tanks, they don't have. And you know what is the nightmare? That Russian factory making the T-90 tanks produce 100 of those tanks a month.
Wow.
Why do you think? Okay, but let me answer that question of what does a win look like? I think a win looks like this. The Russians take Odessa up to Transnistria. Then they're going to make a deal. There's a piece there that Hungary could actually have. That is actually Hungarian. Hungary will take that piece. And if the Poles want to come back to their senses, the Russians are going to tell them, take that area up to Lvov, take it.
There won't be much left.
Excuse me?
There won't be much left.
Yes, it's only the area around Kiev. Mm. And the general feeling is that Kiev will basically become a Russian protectorate. Because the Russians have seen and experienced how devious the West really is.
Yeah.
And how unreliable it is. The West do not respect agreements. They are willing to toss agreements out of the door. And the Russians have now realized that it is impossible to make an agreement with the West. And that is why I say the end is going to be most probably Zelensky being on the deck of a ship, a warship in Odessa, sitting there signing the papers like that a guy from Japan had to do.
Yeah.
Sign the papers and go. No negotiations. There's nothing to negotiate about. The western part of Ukraine is a problem for the Russians because they don't want that. Because it is a Nazi nest. And then the Poles could have had it if they played their cards right.
Yeah.
But I know I've listened to some other commentators said that there's a lot of Polish people that don't want that because they don't want any part of that neo-Nazis.
Yeah.
So, what is the end is going to look like? Geographically, it will be a rough portion, landlocked, sitting there, and who is going to administer it? It'll
be a shadow of its former glory. It'll just be nothing.
For sure, it's gone. It will never get there again. The Russians cannot allow it. They have must now seen how devious the West is. Why do you think the West is now so hysterical about China?
Well, I just want to close with one observation, and that is that what this war has actually stimulated is the elephant in the room, so to speak, is not the war. It's actually the financial war. It's the way Russia and China are now moving away from the fiat Ponzi money scheme that the US are using, and they're now backing their money, their currencies like the ruble and the renminbi with gold, with commodities. So there's actually something tangible behind their money.
Their money.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you look at Saudi Arabia, which is a critical element within the petrodollar, which the US have used to basically have the US dollar as the global currency, the Saudis are now moving away from the Americans, and they're now going to accept gold and other commodities, not just the US dollar, for oil. And that is the huge game
they take
changer.
local currencies.
Yeah, it's
They said they take local. And Saudi wants to get into BRICS.
Yeah, that's right. So what you've now got
I don't think that the Americans really understand what is waiting.
Well, the Americans,
70% of all the dollars is outside the US.
Yeah, in cash.
Now imagine that 70% dollars gets dumped.
Yeah.
What will the value of a dollar be?
It'll be like the Zim dollar.
Yes. What is going to happen to the lives of Americans in America?
Well, look, I'm going to make a prediction here and now. I'm going to say that the outcome of this war will be that the Russians will get the territories they want, and the actual elephant in the room is going to be the fall of America. I can see within the next few years America becoming just a basket case, because the US dollar will no longer be a global currency. Once that happens, the depression that will hit Americans will make 1931 and the Great Depression look like a cakewalk. You're going to have
For sure.
You're going to have the whole country just collapsing, and that's when you're going to have Russia and China.
And you know, a big thing is America was stupid enough to deindustrialize themselves.
Yeah, put it all in
After
China.
World War One, they had a massive industrial machine.
Yeah.
The currency, the financial side collapsed, but that industrial machine hauled them through. Now they don't have that.
Yeah.
You know, the Chinese industrial capacity is more than the United States and Europe combined.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's astronomical. the West is now struggling to find enough ammunition for Ukraine, fighting against Russia. They know if the Chinese joins the fight, they're done. Because the Chinese capacity to make ammunition is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And another thing, this was interesting. I read an article earlier this afternoon, and the guy said, one of the big things that the West must understand is the Chinese has never been in a war recently. They are itching to test their equipment in a war environment.
Yeah. And that's...
So you know, I am with you. Let me tell you this little story.
Go ahead.
It is 2022 January. Zelensky phones Putin and he says, well, these guys want to kill me here in Kiev. And Putin says to him, listen, guy, relax. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to attack you. And immediately you start screaming for help. And you want money and you want weapons. And I will keep you busy. I'll keep the war going there in the east. In the meantime, you milk as much money and as much weapons out of them as you can. Once they're dry, I'll come and take you out there and you can go and retire there somewhere in the Ural Mountains or somewhere. And the West will be bankrupt and disarmed.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much what's happening.
Is it not a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Mate, look, I want to thank you for joining me tonight because, I mean, look, we've had it's like sitting around a braai and just chatting. And
yeah, it was lekker.
Yeah.
No, this was really lekker. And you guys must really go and look on my YouTube channel. I've done a lot of videos about most of these topics that is taboo in the Western environment.
Yeah. And can I just note that you've actually had you've been a victim of YouTube's censorship as well. You've had a couple of community strikes, haven't you?
Yes. I've just spent 2 weeks ago. I had a week in jail.
Well, at least you still got your channel. I've had 4 channels taken down by YouTube over the years, but that's a story for another day.
Yes, it's crazy. You know what? But there's something that I am hoping for. What Elon Musk has done to Twitter, is shaking up the establishment, and there's now a lot of American politicians that say this is bullshit. How did this happen? And now they're lining Facebook and YouTube up to appear before that commission of inquiry.
Yeah.
And all I hope for, because the CEO of YouTube has already resigned.
Yeah, that's what's that crazy woman? Yeah, yeah.
What I hope for is that YouTube and Facebook do to themselves what Musk did to Twitter.
Yeah.
Because this is absolutely crazy. I mean, I was put in jail for mentioning the crazy shit happens here in the rural South Africa. And I only had an image of the husband and the wife.
Yeah.
And for that, I was sanctioned.
Well, look, I can tell you, Colyn, from experience, I can have a live stream like we've had now, which goes for nearly 2 hours, and in that live stream, let's say at 45 minutes, a comment is made which is taboo, and as a result of that, the entire video is taken down, and you get a community strike. I mean, that to me is just pathetic.
I know. I mean, there was I.L. Gray. He's been taken down.
Yeah.
And I mean, that guy, what he shows is actual interviews with people in the Donbass.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, but look, you had your chance of a prediction. Here is my prediction.
Go ahead.
The EU is going to shatter. I don't think the EU will survive another year.
Okay.
A decisive loss for the West in Ukraine will also automatically be the end of NATO. The Americans can no longer afford NATO. NATO has become too expensive. They're sitting with $32 trillion bad debt.
Yeah.
How the hell are they going to work that out? How are they going to get... I mean, if you look, I stumbled onto a channel of a guy that does videos of life in rural America. It is absolutely shocking to see the state of the infrastructure in America. You cannot believe it.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And the people living in tents on the sidewalks and in parks, under bridges, under culverts, in stormwater drains and things like that.
Yeah.
But they have got billions to pump into Ukraine.
Yeah, that's where it's just crazy.
It blows my mind to listen to Yellen standing there in Kiev and saying, I am the bearer of good news today. I'm going to give you $10.5 billion.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they've got people back in America that can't afford food.
It's a crazy, crazy world.
They've done.
Yeah.
The morality of the West has been flushed. And that, if you go and you look at history, that is one of the main reasons for empires to fall.
Yeah.
Morality and corruption.
Well, that's what happened with the Roman Empire.
Yeah, well, all the empires fall like that.
Yeah.
About that. And you're sitting with a problem here. The Americans has got all these bases around the world. Now, if you've seen that meeting that has happened of all that Arabian leaders, and Assad was with them, as well as the guy from Turkey. And that meeting was set up under guidance from Putin. If the Arabs come to peace among themselves tomorrow, the next day, the Israelis is on notice. The American bases, I've listened to one guy talking, a CIA guy, and he said when that Iranians they shot down an American drone in Trump's time. And Trump's his first reaction, he wanted to shoot them back. And the CIA guy said to him, let me just tell you this. You're not aware of the state of the Iranian arms industry. If we shoot at Iran, every American base in the Middle East is wiped out within the next 24 hours, and we will not be able to do anything about it.
Yeah. Now, Colyn, I'm going to wrap
That's
up
the
this.
realities.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up this live stream. We've been going for nearly 2 hours, and when you hit 2 hours, people say that's a bit long to watch. But we're at a nice, comfortable stage. We're getting close to 2 hours. But look, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight, and it's a shame that Peter couldn't
It's a
join
pleasure,
us.
Scott.
But yeah, poor old Peter. I hope he's feeling better, and maybe he's
Because
actually
I saw
watching.
there on the talking list,
Yeah,
you want to talk about the Western Cape going independent. I don't believe it can happen. The DA is going to block it, and the WEF is going to block it like hell.
yeah. Anyway, that's
I
a
don't think they're
subject
going to
for
come right.
another
But I
day.
heard rumors that. Huh?
That's a subject for another day. What we'll do, and
Yes.
I know Marlena's watching. What we'll do is we'll organise another live stream in April, and I'd love you to join us, and we'll get Peter on when he's feeling better, and we'll just talk about the Western Cape and secession. Have a chat.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Because I've got quite a mouthful to say. Scott, thank you very much. It was great. Thank you to the listeners. I appreciate that you tolerated me for this long time. But I'm a guy that likes to talk.
Great chatting to you, mate. We'll catch up soon.
Okay.
Cheers, eh?
Right. Good night.
Bye. All right, guys. That was Colyn Serfontein, or as we know him, Skidmarks, and very interesting fellow, and we're delighted to have him as part of our family. And I'm going to, here I go, guys. I explained why I'm dodging the bullet here, trying to find my. I can just see Mark and Mel having a good laugh right now, but anyway, it is what it is. Okay, I'm going to get our theme song Op ons Rot up, and have a great evening, and don't forget, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time, we will be live again. Bye for now. Where's Op ons Rot? There we go.
Ons loop hand aan hand op goue warm sand, so baie wat ek wil hê, so baie dit brand. Ek staan op my rots met golwe wat bots. Ons het geen vrees, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddelose manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie. Dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Waai sterk, dis kragte wat werk. Die gevoel in my hart, dis vrees wat wil brand. Ons is boere met trots, met my hand in my bors. Ons ken geen vrees, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddelose manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie. Dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien wat gebeur, die leer sal ons nie steen. Kom staan nog 'n keer, ek is stil, want ek weet hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddelose manne. is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddeloze manne. Ons weet gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer.